I'm Jordan. I play in a band called The Crow's Eye. And let's get ready to rock.
Let's get ready to rock.
You think that was enough intro?
A little unnecessary.
Acoustic drums are often the most expensive and difficult instrument to record. There's a lot of things going on, a lot of microphones, a lot of drums to go out of tune or move out of position. There's a drummer to deal with. There's the room. But today, I want to look at some ways we can do it easily and on a pretty tight budget. So we're going to do some minimalist drum recording, and I'm not going for the most modern studio perfect drum sound here. The drums we're using today are a 70s Rogers kit, which fits the kind of vibe and era we're going for. It's a nice drum kit with some nice cymbals to complement it, so something quality to record in the first place. The toms are 14 and 16, and we have a 14-inch Ludwig Ringo snare. Our drummer today is the one and only Dr. Weed, who plays in a local doom band called The Crow's Eye. He's a friend of mine, and we did an acoustic EP too, where he plays guitar and sings, and there's no drums. What makes this a budget and mobile rig is the Zoom H6 handy recorder. This has 4 XLR inputs and a built-in pair of XY condenser mics. It doesn't have enough inputs to close mic everything, so I have to be judicious with my mic usage, and I've come up with 2 plans for how we're going to record these drums. The first is a more modern close mic setup and not too far off from what I would do if I had more inputs. I've got a snare mic, a kick mic, and 2 tom mics. The mics we're using here are nothing too fancy. We've got SM57s on the snare and the toms, and a Beta 52 on the kick. Current prices for these, the Shure drum mic kit is $440, and the Zoom H6 is $250. My second setup is a more vintage style, and this is the Glyn Johns technique, who recorded Led Zeppelin and lots of famous bands. He's a big 70s recording engineer. The Glyn Johns setup is 2 condenser mics, one on top of the kit pointing down at the snare, and another over the right shoulder of the drummer near the floor tom pointing at the snare as well. These have to be the same distance as each other so you don't have phase issues. The Glyn Johns technique also has a kick drum mic, so I have the same kick drum mic placement as my first close mic setup. I also left in the snare mic, so I had the track and we can hear how it sounds with and without the snare mic. The Glyn Johns technique is typically 3 mics and no close snare mic, but we are going to be using it in the mixing so you can hear how it sounds with the added snare close mic. Now, there are a number of other good videos on minimalist drum mic setups, but I don't think any of them are really within a metal context, and you have to contend with very loud guitars, a very dense mix. So I was curious to see how these more vintage or minimalist drum mic styles would fare in a dense mix. So here's the song we did, and I did 2 different drum mixes for this. One more vintage, one more modern, with the 2 different techniques. I'll play it and switch back and forth between the 2 drum mic styles so you can hear it. And on the other side, I'll break down the raw tracks and what I did in the mix in Reaper so you can hear how these techniques sound. Now, I didn't mention what I did with the XY condenser capsule, and I did use it, of course. For the modern style, this was my overhead. So I had 4 close mics, and then these were the overheads. For the Glyn Johns style, because I already have overheads built into that, these were a room mic. So it does have the advantage of having overheads and a room mic. I like room mics. They were just about 8 feet away from the drum, so it wasn't like a huge down the hallway room tone, but it does give it a little extra ambience. I'm going to take all the effects off of these and we'll just listen to them raw. Let's go through the individual tracks, and here are the overheads. Now these I did pan 50% right and 50% left because of the unusual positioning, one over the snare and one over the shoulder. And here's the kick mic. That's also a 24-inch kick on that drum, so it's a big and extra tubby kick, which is cool for this style again, I think. And the snare mic, which is the same as in the close mic setup. And finally, here's the room mic with the built-in mics on the zoom. Now, the traditional way to do the Glyn Johns style would just be the overheads and the kick. So let's listen to how those sound, just the overheads and the kick, and then I'll bring in the snare in the room as well so we can see what those add. So overall, I'm happy with this sound. You don't get a whole lot of control over the levels of everything. So in this case, the toms could have been louder if I wanted them to cut through the mix better. That would have been cool, but I think it's a good sounding setup. I color coded everywhere I edited because I did very little editing on this. And with the theme of this being budget, vintage, I didn't want to over edit this. And also acoustic drum editing takes a long time and it kind of kills the drummer a little bit. So all I did for the editing here in this track was cut up a few parts and just shift them ever so slightly where this whole section was a little ahead of the beat or behind the beat. So I cut these sections, and they're pretty big edits, and just kind of moved them around a little bit to make them a little tighter. For the modern track, I actually didn't do any editing because I thought it came out really good and I didn't really need any editing. So that was the very last take we did, was this last one on the close mic setup, because we'd already done like 8 takes. Let's move over to the close mic setup. So this is pretty standard to how you would usually record a metal drum kit. The built-in condensers, I think, worked pretty fine for overheads. I would have liked to have a snare bottom mic, but we didn't have room for that, so we figured the top was more important. So here are the individual tracks. We've already heard the kick and the snare. Those are the same in this version. So let's listen to the toms. And we tried to get the floor tom to sound a little less flat and cardboardy, but it was a bit difficult. I did some tuning on the whole kit before we started, but I do like the sound of the rack tom better. It's just got a nicer note and resonance to it than the floor tom does here. Here are the overheads, and I just stuck those pretty much right over the kit facing down. They're already an XY pair, though these you can switch around between 90 degrees and 120, and I went with the 120 just to give it a little wider stereo image, because for a modern metal drum recording, you usually do a wider spaced pair, so figured the extra stereo width was good for the overheads here. Let's listen to the isolated mixed versions of these tracks. I hope this has been educational and you've learned something about drum miking today. As always, smash like, subscribe, come over to my Discord. If you ask for it, maybe I'll give you the multi-tracks.